Welcome to Sinister States.
Welcome, Night Wanderer. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Dim the lights, let the city's distant hum fade into the background, and remember to subscribe for more stories that blur the line between myth and memory. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of the city, searching for the truths that hide in the cracks. 5 urban legends, 5 stories, each one whispered in the dark until someone finally proved it was real. Let's begin with the shadow and the tunnel. There's a place in every city where the light doesn't quite reach. In my city, it's the old railway tunnel beneath the river, a relic from the days when steam engines still coughed their way through the heart of downtown. The tunnel's been closed for decades, sealed at both ends with rusted iron gates, but the legend never left. They called it the Shadows Crossing. Kids dared each other to sneak in, to walk the length of the tunnel at midnight, to see if the stories were true. The legend was simple. If you entered the tunnel alone after midnight, you'd see a shadow that didn't belong to you. It would follow you, matching your steps, always just out of sight. If you made it to the other side without looking back, you'd be safe. But if you turned around, the shadow would step out of the darkness and you'd never leave the tunnel again. I first heard the story from my older brother, Jamie. He was the kind of kid who collected dares like trophies, who never backed down from a challenge. One summer night, when the air was thick with the promise of rain, he told me he was going to walk the tunnel. I begged him not to, but he just laughed, ruffled my hair, and promised he'd be back before sunrise. He never came home. The police searched the tunnel, found nothing but his flashlight, still warm to the touch, lying halfway between the 2 gates. They said he must have run away, but I knew better. I knew the legend had taken him. Years passed. The city grew around the tunnel, but the story never faded. People still whispered about the shadow, about the missing kids, about the strange cold that lingered near the tunnel's mouth. I tried to move on, but every time I passed the river, I felt the weight of Jamie's absence pressing against my chest. Then, last winter, something changed. The city announced plans to demolish the tunnel to make way for a new subway line. For weeks, crews worked to clear the debris, to cut through the iron gates. On the day they finally broke through, I stood with the crowd, heart pounding, watching as the workers disappeared into the darkness. They didn't come out for hours. When they finally emerged, their faces were pale, eyes wide with something like fear. They'd found something, they said, something that shouldn't have been there. The news broke that night. Deep in the tunnel, behind a false wall, the workers had discovered a hidden chamber. Inside were dozens of personal items, flashlights, shoes, backpacks, each one tagged and cataloged by the police. Among them was Jamie's old red baseball cap, the one he'd worn the night he disappeared. But that wasn't all. In the center of the chamber, etched into the concrete floor, was a single word: look. The police tried to explain it away. They said it was the work of a deranged squatter, that the items had been collected over the years by someone living in the tunnel. But the legend spread faster than the official story. People said the shadow was real, that it had claimed its victims and left their belongings as a warning that I couldn't let it go. I needed to know the truth. So, one night, I returned to the tunnel. The gates were gone, the entrance wide open, but the air was colder than I remembered. I stepped inside, flashlight trembling in my hand, and walked the length of the tunnel, counting my steps, listening for the echo of another pair of feet. Halfway through, I felt it, a presence behind me, a chill that crept up my spine. I kept walking, heart hammering, refusing to look back. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating, but I forced myself forward, one step at a time. When I reached the far end, I turned off my flashlight and waited. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant drip of water. Then, slowly, a shadow detached itself from the wall, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace. It stopped a few feet away, its form shifting and flickering in the dim light. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. The shadow raised an arm, pointing back the way I'd come. I understood. It was showing me the way out. I stumbled back through the tunnel, never looking back, never stopping until I reached the street. When I turned around, the shadow was gone, swallowed by the darkness. The next day, the city sealed the tunnel for good. They filled it with concrete, erasing the last trace of the legend. But I know what I saw. I know the shadow is still there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to walk the tunnel alone. And sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the river is still, I hear footsteps behind me, echoing through the darkness. I never look back, because some legends are real, and some shadows never leave. But that's not the end of the story. Not for me, and not for the city. Because after the tunnel was sealed, strange things started happening in the neighborhoods nearby. People reported seeing figures in the fog, shapes that moved against the grain of the streetlights, always just out of sight. Dogs refused to walk near the riverbank. Children woke from nightmares, claiming they'd seen a man with no face standing at the foot of their beds. The city tried to ignore it, to write it off as mass hysteria, but the stories kept coming. One night, a security guard patrolling the new subway construction site vanished without a trace. His radio was found near the old tunnel entrance, still crackling with static. The last thing he said before the line went dead was, "There's someone down here. I think they're lost." The legend grew, fed by fear and uncertainty. People started leaving offerings at the site, flowers, candles, even old baseball caps. They said it was to appease the shadow, to keep it from wandering too far from its home. I started having dreams. In them, I was back in the tunnel, walking alone, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I could hear Jamie's voice, calling my name, but I could never find him. The shadow was always there, just out of reach, watching, waiting. One night, I woke to find my bedroom window open, the curtains billowing in the cold wind. On the windowsill was a single, perfect footprint, outlined in dust. It was too small to be mine, too large to be a child's. I closed the window, heart pounding, and tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but the dreams kept coming. Each time, the shadow grew closer, its form more distinct. I started to recognize features, broad shoulders, a familiar tilt of the head, the way it moved with a slight limp. It was Jamie, or what was left of him. I became obsessed. I spent hours researching the tunnel, digging through old newspaper archives, interviewing anyone who remembered the legend. I found stories dating back over a century, accounts of missing workers, unexplained deaths, sightings of a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. The details changed, but the core remained the same. The tunnel was haunted, and those who entered alone rarely returned. I started to wonder if the shadow was ever really evil, or if it was just lonely, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to remember it, to set it free. One night, I returned to the site, armed with nothing but a flashlight and Jamie's old cap. The construction crews were gone, the area deserted. I stood at the edge of the concrete, staring into the darkness, and whispered his name. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. It stopped a few feet away, head tilted, as if listening. I held out the cap, my hand shaking. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have stopped you. I should have come with you." The shadow reached out, its hand passing through mine like a breath of cold air. For a moment, I felt a surge of warmth, a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Then the figure faded, dissolving into the night that I left the cap on the ground and walked away, the weight in my chest finally lifting. I knew Jamie was gone, but I also knew he wasn't alone anymore. The city moved on. The subway line opened, the tunnel forgotten by all but a few. But sometimes, late at night, when the trains rattle through the darkness, passengers report seeing a figure standing on the tracks, watching as they pass. A shadow, waiting for someone to remember. And if you ever find yourself walking near the river and you feel a chill run down your spine, don't look back. Just keep moving. Because some legends are real, and some shadows never leave. Every city has a building that seems to watch you back. In ours, it was the old Maraway Hotel, a crumbling, 12-story relic that loomed over the intersection of 5th and Main. The windows were always dark, the bricks stained with decades of rain and neglect, but one window on the 7th floor was different. Even after the hotel closed, people swore they saw a woman standing there, her pale face pressed to the glass, her eyes following you as you passed below. The legend was as old as the hotel itself. They called her the woman in the window. Some said she was a jilted bride who leapt to her death on her wedding night. Others claimed she was a maid who'd been locked in a closet and forgotten, her ghost doomed to wander the halls forever. The stories changed with every retelling, but the details stayed the same. If you looked up at the 7th floor after midnight, you'd see her watching. And if you met her gaze, you'd dream of her that night and wake with a mark on your skin, a bruise in the shape of a hand. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. But the Maraway was a fixture in my childhood, a place my friends and I dared each other to approach on Halloween, our hearts pounding as we crept up the cracked sidewalk. We'd throw rocks at the boarded-up doors, shout dares into the empty lobby, then run when the wind rattled the broken glass. But none of us ever looked up at the 7th floor. Not after what happened to Tyler. Tyler was the bravest of us, or maybe just the most reckless. He was the first to suggest we spend the night in the hotel to prove the legend was just a story. We were 16, bored and restless, desperate for something to break the monotony of summer. So one night, we climbed the fire escape, our flashlights flickering as we slipped through a broken window on the 3rd floor. The hotel was a maze of peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards, the air thick with the smell of mold and old smoke. Our footsteps echoed down the empty halls, every sound magnified by the silence. We made our way to the 7th floor, our nerves fraying with every step. The door to room 714 was ajar, swinging gently on its hinges. Inside, the room was empty except for a single chair facing the window. The glass was smeared with grime, but in the moonlight, we could see the city spread out below, the streetlights glowing like embers. Tyler sat in the chair, grinning, and dared us to look for the woman. Maybe she's shy, he joked, tapping the glass. Maybe she's waiting for someone to notice her. We laughed, the sound brittle, and took turns sitting in the chair, peering into the darkness. Nothing happened. No ghostly figure, no cold breath on the back of our necks. Just the city, indifferent and endless. But that night, Tyler had the dream. He told us about it the next morning, his voice shaky. He'd been standing in the hotel room, looking out the window, when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned, and there she was, the woman from the legend, her face pale and blurred, her eyes black as coal. She whispered something he couldn't understand, her breath cold against his ear. When he woke, there was a bruise on his shoulder, the shape of a handprint that we laughed it off, called it a coincidence, but Tyler changed after that. He stopped coming out with us, stopped answering our calls. He said he couldn't sleep, that he kept seeing her in his dreams, always standing at the window, always watching. A week later, he disappeared. The police searched the hotel, but found nothing. His parents moved away, unable to bear the empty house. The rest of us drifted apart, the legend of the woman in the window growing darker with every retelling. Years passed. The city changed, but the Maraway remained, its windows staring down at the street like empty eyes. I moved away, tried to forget, but the memory of that night lingered, a splinter in my mind. Then, last year, the city announced plans to demolish the hotel. The news dredged up old memories, old fears. I found myself drawn back to the city, to the intersection of 5th and Main, where the Maraway still stood, defiant against the march of time that I arrived just before midnight, the streets empty, the air heavy with anticipation. The hotel was surrounded by chain-link fence, warning signs plastered to the gates. But the 7th floor window was still there, still watching. I stood on the sidewalk, heart pounding, and looked up. For a moment, nothing happened. The window was dark, the glass reflecting the city lights. Then, slowly, a shape appeared. A woman, her face pale and indistinct, her eyes fixed on mine. I couldn't look away. Her gaze held me, cold and unblinking, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine that I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty street. That night, I dreamed of her. In the dream, I was back in room 714, the city spread out below. The woman stood by the window, her hand resting on my shoulder. She whispered my name, her voice soft and distant, and I felt a cold pressure on my skin that I woke with a start, my heart racing. On my shoulder was a bruise, the shape of a handprint. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, just an old fear resurfacing. But the mark lingered, dark and unmistakable. I started seeing her everywhere, in the reflections of shop windows, in the shadows of passing cars. Always watching, always waiting. I became obsessed, digging through old records, searching for any mention of the woman. I found stories dating back to the hotel's opening, accounts of guests who vanished, of maids who quit after seeing a woman in white wandering the halls. The details changed, but the core remained. The woman was real, and she was trapped in the hotel, waiting for someone to notice her. I returned to the Maraway one last time, determined to put the legend to rest. The demolition was set for the next morning, the building already half-gutted by crews. I slipped through a gap in the fence, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hotel was a skeleton, its walls stripped bare, its floors littered with debris. I climbed the stairs to the 7th floor, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Room 714 was still there, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the chair was gone, but the window remained, smeared with years of grime. I stood before it, heart pounding, and whispered, "I see you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the glass began to clear, the grime dissolving into mist. The woman appeared, her face pale and sad, her eyes filled with longing. She reached out, her hand pressing against the glass. I pressed my hand to hers, the cold seeping into my skin. She whispered something, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." The mist faded, and she was gone. The window was empty, the glass cleared, and I left the hotel as the sun rose, the city waking around me. The bruise on my shoulder faded, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The Maraway was demolished that day, the legend buried beneath concrete and steel. But sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the streets are empty, I see her in the windows of new buildings, her face reflected in the glass, watching, waiting, because some legends never die. They just find new windows to watch from. There's a stretch of highway outside the city where the fog rolls in thick and low, swallowing the road and everything on it. Locals call it Dead Man's Curve, a winding, two-lane blacktop that hugs the edge of the old quarry. The guardrails are dented, the asphalt patched and scarred, and every year, someone skids off the road and into the trees. But it's not the accidents that made Dead Man's Curve famous. It's the hitchhiker. The legend goes like this. On certain nights, when the fog is thickest and the moon is new, drivers see a young woman standing by the side of the road. She's always alone, always dressed in white, her hair long and tangled, her face pale as the mist. If you stop, she asks for a ride home. She gives you an address on the far side of town and sits quietly in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap. She never speaks, never looks you in the eye. But when you reach her destination, she's gone, vanished, leaving nothing but a chill in the air and a damp spot on the seat. People have been telling this story for decades. Some say she's the ghost of a girl who died in a car crash on prom night. Others claim she's a warning, a harbinger of bad luck for anyone foolish enough to pick her up. Most just laugh it off, another campfire tale to scare new drivers. But every so often, someone comes forward with a story that's a little too real. I never believed in the hitchhiker. Not until the night I saw her myself. It was late October, the kind of night when the fog creeps in early and the world feels smaller, quieter. I was driving home from a friend's house, my headlights barely cutting through the mist. The radio was playing some old love song, the kind that makes you feel lonely even when you're not. I rounded Dead Man's Curve, my hands tied on the wheel, when I saw her. She was standing just beyond the guardrail, her white dress glowing in the headlights, her hair hanging in wet strands around her face. She didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there, watching as I approached. My heart hammered in my chest. I slowed down, rolling to a stop a few feet away. She stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the wet pavement. She leaned down, her face inches from the window, and spoke in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Can you take me home?" I nodded, unable to speak. She opened the back door and slid inside, her dress rustling against the seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but her face was hidden in shadow. She gave me an address on the far side of town, a place I'd never been. I pulled back onto the road, the car silent except for the hum of the engine. I tried to make small talk, to ask if she was okay, but she didn't answer. She just stared out the window, her hands folded in her lap. The drive felt endless. The fog pressed in on all sides, the world shrinking to the circle of light cast by my headlights. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting her to disappear, but she was always there, silent and still. When we reached the address, an old Victorian house at the end of a dead-end street, I turned to tell her we'd arrived. The back seat was empty. The door was closed, the seat damp where she'd been sitting. I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Then I noticed something on the seat, a single white rose, its petals wet with dew. I got out of the car, the rose clutched in my hand, and walked up to the house. The porch light was on, the windows glowing with warm yellow light. I rang the bell, my hands shaking. An elderly woman answered, her eyes red and tired. She looked at the rose, then at me, and her face crumpled. "You saw her, didn't you?" she whispered. That I nodded, unable to speak. "She was my daughter," the woman said, her voice trembling. "She died on this road, years ago. Every so often, someone brings her home." She took the rose from my hand, her fingers brushing mine, and closed the door. I drove home in silence, the fog swallowing the road behind me. I never saw the hitchhiker again, but sometimes, late at night, I dream of her standing by the side of the road, waiting for someone to take her home. After that night, I started collecting stories. I talked to truckers, cab drivers, anyone who'd ever driven Dead Man's Curve after dark. The details changed, but the core remained: a girl in white, a ride home, a vanishing act. Some said she spoke, others said she wept. A few claimed she left behind a token, a rose, a ribbon, a single silver earring. One driver, a man named Carl, told me he'd picked her up 3 times in the same year. Each time, she gave a different address, but always vanished before he could ask her name. The last time, she left a note on the dashboard: "Thank you for trying." Another woman, a nurse on the night shift, said she saw the hitchhiker standing in the middle of the road, her arms outstretched. She swerved to avoid her, crashed into a ditch, and woke to find the girl sitting beside her, holding her hand. When help arrived, the girl was gone, but the nurse's injuries were minor, a miracle, the doctors said. The stories piled up, each one a thread in a tapestry of grief and longing. I started to wonder if the hitchhiker was more than a ghost, if she was a memory, a fragment of sorrow that refused to fade. One night, I returned to Dead Man's Curve, determined to see her again. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the fog, my heart pounding with anticipation. I passed the spot where I'd seen her, but the road was empty. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and waited. The fog thickened, swirling around the car. The world grew silent, the only sound my own breathing. Minutes passed, then hours. I started to drift, my eyes heavy, my thoughts tangled. Then, suddenly, she was there. She stood by the guardrail, her dress glowing in the moonlight, her eyes fixed on mine. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as I rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her face unreadable. She climbed into the back seat, her presence filling the car with a cold, damp chill. I drove in silence, the address already in my mind. When we reached the house, she leaned forward, her breath cold against my ear. "Thank you," she whispered. I turned, but she was gone. On the seat was a single white rose, its petals glistening with dew. I left the rose on the porch, rang the bell, and walked away. The legend of the vanishing hitchhiker endures, passed from driver to driver, from parent to child. Some say she's a warning, a reminder to drive carefully on Dead Man's Curve. Others believe she's searching for something, a way home, a final goodbye. But I think she's a memory, a story that refuses to end. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the road disappears, I find myself looking for her, hoping to see her one last time, because some legends are more than stories. They're echoes of the past, waiting for someone to listen. Every city has its own version of the smiling man. Sometimes he's called the grinner, sometimes the midnight stalker, sometimes just the man who smiles. The details change, but the core of the legend is always the same. A figure who appears on empty streets in the dead of night, moving with an unnatural, loping gait, his mouth stretched into a grin that's too wide, too fixed, too hungry. He doesn't speak. He doesn't chase. He just watches and smiles and waits for you to make the wrong move. For years, the smiling man was just a story told by college kids walking home from bars, or by insomniacs who swore they saw something strange from their apartment windows. But in the summer of 2012, the legend became real. I was living downtown then, in a cramped studio above a laundromat. The city was alive at night, sirens, laughter, the distant thump of music from clubs that never seemed to close. I worked late shifts at a diner, and most nights I walked home after midnight, cutting through alleys and side streets to avoid the crowds. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had, but I never believed them. Not until the night I saw him myself. It was a Thursday, just after 2 a.m. The air was thick with the smell of rain and hot asphalt. I was tired, my feet aching, my mind drifting. I turned onto 14th Street, a narrow stretch lined with shuttered shops and flickering streetlights. That's when I saw him. He was standing under a broken lamp, his back to me, his head tilted at an odd angle. He wore a suit, cheap, ill-fitting, the kind you find in thrift stores. His hair was slicked back, his skin pale in the yellow light. And he was smiling. Not a friendly smile, not a nervous one, but a grin so wide it looked painful, as if his face might split in two. I slowed, my heart pounding. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, grinning at the empty street that I crossed to the other side, keeping my eyes on the ground. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and cold. I walked faster, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Then I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, like shoes dragging on wet pavement. I glanced back. He was following me, his walk strange and jerky, as if he was learning how to move for the first time. His arms hung at his sides, his fingers twitching. I broke into a run, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached my building, slamming the door behind me, my hands shaking. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those wide, empty eyes, that impossible grin. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a drunk, a prank. But the feeling lingered, a knot of fear in my stomach. A week later, I heard about the attack. A woman was found in an alley off 14th Street, her clothes torn, her face bruised. She told the police she'd been followed by a man with a smile, like a broken mask. He hadn't spoken, hadn't touched her, just watched as she tripped and fell, then vanished into the shadows. The police chalked it up to a mugging gone wrong, but the story spread. More people came forward, night shift workers, delivery drivers, bartenders. They all described the same thing. A man in a suit, moving with that strange, loping gait, his mouth stretched into a grin that never faded. The city grew tense. People stopped walking alone at night. The police increased patrols, but the smiling man kept appearing, always just out of reach, always gone before anyone could catch him. I became obsessed. I started collecting stories, mapping sightings, looking for patterns. I found posts on message boards, grainy photos, shaky videos. In every image, the smiling man looked the same, tall, thin, his face twisted into that impossible grin. One night, I decided to confront him. I waited until after midnight, then walked the route where he'd been seen most often. The streets were empty, the city holding its breath. I passed the broken lamp on 14th, my heart pounding. He was there. He stepped out of the shadows, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes locked on mine, his grin widening. I forced myself to stand my ground. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. But he didn't answer. He just smiled, his head tilting to one side. I took a step back. He mirrored me, his body bending in ways that didn't seem possible. I turned and ran, the sound of his footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a crowded street, the noise and light washing away the fear. After that night, the sightings stopped. The city moved on, the legend fading into the background noise of urban life. But sometimes, late at night, I see him in my dreams, standing under a broken lamp, his grin wide and empty, waiting for me to make the wrong move. A year later, the police made an arrest. A man named Daniel Harker, a drifter with a history of mental illness, was found living in an abandoned building near 14th Street. He wore a suit, his hair slicked back, his face twisted into a permanent grin by a rare neurological disorder. He was linked to several assaults, but never charged with anything more serious. The city breathed a sigh of relief. The smiling man was just a man, after all, a sad, broken person, not a monster. But the stories didn't stop. People still saw him on empty streets, in the reflection of shop windows, in the flicker of dying streetlights. Some said he was a ghost, a memory of fear that lingered long after the danger was gone. Others believed he was something else, something older, something that wore the face of a man but was never human. I moved away, started a new life in a new city. But the legend followed me. Every so often, I'd hear a story, a friend of a friend, a cousin, a neighbor, about a man with a grin too wide, eyes too empty, movements too strange. And sometimes, when I walk home late at night, I catch a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye, a shadow under a broken lamp, a smile that never fades, because some legends are born from fear. And some fears never die. Some urban legends are born in the shadows of alleyways or whispered in the hush of midnight trains, but others hang quietly on the walls of ordinary homes, hiding in plain sight. The legend of the crying boy painting is one of those, the kind that seeps into the fabric of daily life, unnoticed until it's too late. It started in the 1980s, in a string of small towns across England. The painting was simple: a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, with dark hair and wide, sorrowful eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He wore a threadbare shirt, his gaze fixed on something just beyond the frame. The artist, an Italian painter named Giovanni Bragolin, had produced hundreds of these portraits, and prints were sold in department stores and markets all over the country. For a while, it seemed every other house had a crying boy on the wall. But then the fires started. The first was in a council house in Yorkshire. The blaze gutted the living room, reducing furniture and photographs to ash. But when the firemen sifted through the wreckage, they found the crying boy painting untouched, its colors as bright as the day it was hung. The local paper ran a photo of the painting, its glass cracked but the boy's face unscathed, and the story spread like wildfire. Soon, more fires followed. In each case, the crying boy painting survived, sometimes the only thing left intact in a room of blackened ruins. People began to whisper that the painting was cursed, that it brought misfortune to anyone who hung it in their home. Some said the boy's tears were for the families he doomed, others that the artist had made a pact with the devil, trapping a restless spirit in every canvas. I first heard the story from my grandmother. She kept her own crying boy in the hallway, just above the telephone table. I remember staring at it as a child, unsettled by the boy's eyes, the way they seemed to follow me as I moved. My grandmother would laugh off my fears, but she never let anyone touch the painting, not even to dust the frame. When I was 12, our house caught fire. It started in the kitchen, a forgotten pan on the stove. The flames spread quickly, devouring curtains and cabinets, filling the house with thick, choking smoke. We escaped through the back door, coughing and crying, watching as the fire brigade battled the blaze. When the fire was finally out, we crept back inside, picking through the ruins. The kitchen was gone, the living room a blackened shell. But in the hallway, the crying boy painting hung untouched, its glass smeared with soot, but the boy's face as clear as ever. My grandmother took it down that night, wrapped it in a towel, and carried it to the river. She threw it in, watching as it floated for a moment before sinking beneath the surface. She never spoke of it again. Years later, as an adult, I started researching the legend. I found hundreds of stories, families who'd lost everything but the painting, firemen who refused to enter houses where the crying boy hung, priests who claimed the paintings were possessed. Some people tried to destroy their paintings, but they wouldn't burn. Others gave them away, only for the fires to follow. I tracked down an old fire chief, a man named Ron Hall, who'd investigated dozens of these cases. He told me he'd seen the paintings survive infernos that melted steel and shattered stone. "It's not natural," he said, his voice low. "I don't know what it is, but I wouldn't have one in my house." I found a collector, a woman named Margaret, who'd gathered over 50 crying boy paintings in her basement. She said she was trying to break the curse, to keep the paintings away from families who might be hurt. Her house had never burned, but she admitted she heard crying at night, soft and persistent, echoing through the walls. I asked her if she believed the legend. She hesitated, then nodded. "There's something in those eyes," she said. "Something that doesn't want to be forgotten." I decided to see for myself. I bought a crying boy print from an antique shop. The colors faded, but the boy's gaze as haunting as ever. I hung it in my apartment, half expecting something to happen. For weeks, nothing did. But then, small things started to go wrong. A blown fuse, a scorched pan, the smell of smoke with no source. I laughed it off, but the unease grew. One night, I woke to the sound of crying. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it seemed to come from the wall where the painting hung. I got up, heart pounding, and stood before the painting. The boy's eyes glistened in the moonlight, his tears shining like a drop of mercury that I reached out to touch the glass, and the crying stopped. The next morning, I took the painting down and locked it in a closet. The strange occurrences ceased, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something into my home, something that watched and waited. I tried to return the painting to the shop, but the owner refused to take it back. "I don't want that thing in here," he said, his eyes wide with fear. I posted about my experience online, and the responses flooded in. Some people shared their own stories: fires, accidents, unexplained misfortune. Others claimed the legend was nonsense, a coincidence blown out of proportion. But the stories kept coming, each one a thread in a tapestry of fear and fascination, that I decided to visit the artist's hometown in Italy, hoping to find answers. I tracked down a distant relative of Bragolin, an old man who remembered the painter as a quiet, troubled soul. He told me Bragolin had painted the boy after meeting him in an orphanage, a child who never spoke, who cried for hours without reason. The boy disappeared soon after, and Bragolin was never the same. Some say the artist painted the boy's sorrow into every canvas, trapping his grief for eternity. Others believe the boy's spirit haunts the paintings, seeking release. That I left Italy with more questions than answers. Back home, I decided to get rid of the painting once and for all. I took it to a bonfire, the flames roaring in the night. I tossed the painting onto the fire, watching as the edges curled and blackened. But the boy's face remained, untouched by the flames, his eyes shining through the smoke. I buried the painting in the woods, far from my home. I never saw it again, but sometimes, when I walk through the trees, I hear the faint sound of crying, carried on the wind. The legend of the crying boy endures, passed from house to house, from family to family. Some say the curse is broken, that the paintings have lost their power. Others believe the boy still waits, his sorrow undimmed, his eyes searching for someone to remember him. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I see his face, pale and sorrowful, a single tear rolling down his cheek. I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for someone to set him free. Because some legends are more than stories. They're warnings, reminders of the things we carry with us, the sorrows we can't escape, and some eyes never stop watching. You've heard the stories. You've walked the midnight streets, peered into the shadows, and listened for footsteps that echo just a little too close behind. Maybe you felt the chill of a legend brushing past you, or caught a glimpse of something in the corner of your eye, a shape, a face, a memory that doesn't quite belong. Maybe you've wondered, as so many have, why these stories persist. Why, in a world of science and certainty, we still whisper about shadows and tunnels, women in windows, hitchhikers who vanish, men who smile too wide, and paintings that refuse to burn. The answer, perhaps, is simpler than we think. Urban legends are more than just stories. They are the city's dreams and nightmares, the collective memory of 1,000 lives lived in the same streets, the same buildings, the same rooms. They are warnings, yes, but also invitations, reminders that the world is stranger, deeper, and more mysterious than we want to admit. They are the echoes of real events, twisted by fear and hope and the need to make sense of the senseless. Tonight, you've traveled through 5 legends that turn out to be real. You've seen how a shadow in a tunnel can become a city's secret, how a woman in a window can haunt generations, how a hitchhiker's sorrow can linger on a lonely road, how a smile can become a mask for something we can't explain, and how a painting can carry grief from one home to the next. You've seen how truth and myth blur, how the line between what happened and what we believe is never as clear as we'd like. But maybe, as you turn off the lights and settle into the quiet, you'll realize that these stories aren't just about fear. They're about connection. Every legend is a thread, tying us to the people who came before, to the places we call home, to the mysteries we share. When you hear a story about a haunted painting or a vanishing hitchhiker, you're not just hearing about someone else's nightmare. You're hearing about the hopes and fears of your own city, your own family, your own heart. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start to notice the legends in your own life. The house on your street that no one stays in for long. The old man who walks the park at dawn, always humming the same tune. The photograph in your grandmother's album, the one with the face you can't quite place. The feeling you get when you pass a certain alley, or a certain window, or a certain stretch of road. The stories you tell yourself to explain the unexplainable. Because the truth is, we all live with legends. We all carry stories that don't quite fit, memories that don't quite fade, questions that don't quite have answers. And that's what makes us human. That's what keeps us searching, listening, wondering. The next time you hear a story that seems too strange to be true, don't dismiss it. Ask yourself what it means, what it's trying to tell you. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's a comfort. Maybe it's just a way of saying, you're not alone. Someone else has been here before. And if you ever find yourself walking home late at night, and you feel a chill run down your spine, or you see a face in a window, or you hear footsteps behind you, remember these stories. Remember that sometimes the legends are real. Sometimes the shadows do move. Sometimes the past does reach out to touch the present. But also remember that you are part of the story now. Every time you share a legend, every time you listen, every time you wonder, you keep the story alive. You give it new life, new meaning, new hope. So keep listening. Keep wondering. Keep telling the stories that matter. And if you ever find yourself at the edge of a legend, standing at the mouth of a tunnel, or the foot of a haunted staircase, or the side of a lonely road, don't be afraid. Take a breath. Look around. Listen to the city's heartbeat, the pulse of memory and myth. And know that you are not alone, because the city is full of stories. And tonight, you've become part of them. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the shadows. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own legends in the comments below. Who knows? Maybe your story will be the next one whispered in the dark, the next truth hidden in plain sight, the next legend that turns out to be real. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your mind curious, and your heart brave. The world is waiting. The stories are waiting. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of the light, the next legend is already beginning. Good night. And remember, some legends never die. They're just waiting for you to find them.